Hi everyone, and welcome to an episode of Flawless. My name is Micah and I'm your host. So before we get started with today's episode, I wanted to talk a little bit more about who I am and why I started this podcast. Basically, ever since I was 13 years old, I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. And now, as a sophomore in high school, I find myself doing everything I can to learn more about the field of law. But growing up in a family without any lawyers, I've had to rely on things like books, websites, and movies. But at the end of the day, I've learned that talking to a real-life lawyer is something completely different. Hearing first-hand experiences from someone who's already walked the path is so essential in learning about the field that you want to pursue, so in my case, law. This realization has led me to create Flawless, Female Lawyer Lessons. Here in Flawless, I aim to inspire those just like me, individuals who aspire to be a lawyer. In Flawless, I also aim to amplify the voices of female lawyers who go through a male-dominated field. So, together, I hope we can learn more about the advice, the strengths, and the challenges that female lawyers face. And without further ado, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hi everyone, welcome to an episode of Flawless. Basically, to those who haven't watched before, Flawless is a podcast where I interview practicing lawyers to see where they started and where they got to today and some important lessons that they've learned along the way. So today I'm joined here with Bella, and she's going to tell us about the type of law she does. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Bella McDermott. I work at a multilateral development bank. I currently work in the strategy and policy department, but I've also worked in the legal department of the bank. I started legal practice when I was 30 years old. I'm now almost 50. So almost 20 years of practice.
Great. Okay, so let's start with the first question I prepared. You already gave a little bit about yourself, but can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and kind of your high school life? So is there anything in high school, because I feel like a lot of our viewers are going to be in high school, so is there anything in high school that you did that really pushed you to the field of law or any other career path?
Not really. In my high school, we had it was quite our courses were quite prescriptive. We didn't have, in some high schools now I think you can study law, but when I went to high school, you studied English. Mandatory courses were English, mathematics, science, and then as you moved on in your high school years, then you could study different types of science, but we didn't have a range of humanities courses. You could study history and geography. But
so you didn't take anything like IB?
So I didn't take anything like IB.
Okay, so after high school, what college did you go to?
I qualified in law in New Zealand, so I went through the New Zealand high school system, and so from high school in New Zealand you move on directly to university. So unlike the American system, you can from high school immediately start studying law. Depending on the university, sometimes you need to do a 1 year, the very first year of your law degree, you basically do one course, and at the end of that course, you then qualify into law school, but you're not admitted into law school in your first year of university.
I see.
Yeah.
So in university, were you thinking that you already wanted to pursue law, or was there any other?
Yeah, so I decided to pursue law at the end of my high school term, and there were two triggers for studying law. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I went to the careers counsellor at my high school, and she gave me this test of which outlined different sort of activities, and you could select what kind of activities you like to do. So it was much more about the skills that you like using. So I like analysing, I like reading, I like writing, and so using that skills assessment, she suggested a number of different courses, and one of the courses was law. The second aspect was that at the time, maybe it's not such a nice experience, but I had a friend who was she made trying to think of how to describe this, but basically I was a witness in an indecent assault case. That it was a case of a young woman who made a claim against her male teacher, and that brought me into the contact with the legal system, and a range of different people, lawyers, police officers. I gave evidence in court, and from that experience, I realised that I had a strong interest in pursuing a career.
How old were you when you experienced this?
I was 17.
Oh wow! So that's really young. So when you were 17, was there like a specific moment in court that really pushed you and thought, "Wow, I want to do more of this"?
I don't think that there was necessarily a specific moment, but I realised the power of a legal background. That if you had a background in law, you could understand how basically our system of governance worked. You could you had some kind of sense of how understanding the criminal justice system, and then understanding how other people should treat you as well.
So I kind of have had one of those experiences myself. So when I was, I think maybe like 12, I was kind of like cyberbullied by one of my friends who pretended to be an anonymous account. And basically, instead of telling my parents that I was being blackmailed over Instagram, I chose to pretend that I had a lawyer that would be able to email her at any time and start suing. And I Googled all these digital consent laws that prevented her from posting anything. And that's when I also realized that how much power law has and how scared people get if you just have a little bit information about the law. So kind of have the same backstory of why we wanted to go into law.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting story. You were very clever. I mean, perhaps knowing your parents, they would be unhappy that you didn't tell them. But, it sounds like you made a smart decision at the time.
So I think that really showed me that law is really powerful, and that since a lot of people don't have knowledge about it, they just know it's scary. I think that's kind of what's so powerful about it. But moving a bit forward, so we know a little bit about why. We know that you went to college in New Zealand. So can you tell me a little bit about kind of what was the struggles and what were the problems that you faced in law school? Because I know law school to me right now, I think that it seems this very scary place with a lot of readings, but with your first-hand experience, how would you describe it?
I think you're probably right to be cautious about it. There was a lot of reading. I was also very nervous because I find exams really challenging. The other aspect that was quite nerve-wracking for me is I had excelled in the sciences at school. I wasn't at sciences and history, but I didn't really excel in English. So I knew that there would be a lot of writing, and I didn't like exams. So it was quite daunting, and I knew that 600 people would apply and do the first year course of law school, and then it would be whittled down to 200 people who would get through. So there was a lot of pressure to perform in my first year, and I did study very hard. I know after every every class I would come home and I'd write notes, and then I would read everything, and then I'd write notes on everything that I'd read. But you know, I managed to scrape through my first year, and at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
Was there anything that happened to you in law school that really motivated you to keep pushing? Because it sounds very stressful, you know, going from 600 to 200.
Yeah. I don't know if there was anything that happened in the first year. It's just that that's something that I wanted to do. And I also found the topics very interesting.
Yeah.
So it wasn't... So, I mean, there's a motivation of getting through. Perhaps, you know, there's an element of ego because you want to show that, you know, you're intelligent and that you can prove yourself. So you're like determined. It's like, oh my goodness, I've signed up to this really expensive course and I've got to pass. Otherwise, everyone will be disappointed in me. Yeah.
So a bit of personal pressure.
A lot of personal pressure.
I see.
Yeah.
So when you were one of the 200, that's when you started finishing up law school?
So from once I got into the 200, then we had another 3 years of law school.
I see.
And so then in the second year, which is actually, we just do 4 topics, criminal, public law, property, and contract law. So those just 4 topics, and we have to then get through those 4 topics to get into the third year. And in the third and fourth year we have two compulsory subjects, but we were able then to select a range of other courses.
So in New Zealand in law school, you actually learned a lot of different types of laws. You didn't just specialize in one.
Yeah, so we don't really get an opportunity to specialize until our third year when we have some optional courses. But even then, you aren't too specialised at that stage. I mean, you can take a number of subjects that would sort of put you in the direction of going into the criminal legal path, or other ones that would perhaps put you on the path of litigation or the path of, you know, general commercial law. And you could also study family law as well, which was actually a very popular topic when I studied law. But then a lot of your real learning as a lawyer happens on the job.
I see. So kind of taking a step back from that though, did you realize that what law you wanted to specialize in your third year of college, or when did you realize what type of law you wanted to specialize in?
In my third year of college, I thought that I wanted to do environmental law. And I had to do a paper. So I took an environmental law paper, and then I also took a paper on planning, which a lot of, and in New Zealand at the time we had one of the first laws on sustainable management, sustainable resource management in the world.
Wow.
And in order to really practice environmental law, you needed to have a good understanding of the resource management laws, and that I actually found it really boring. So I had this desire to be an environmental lawyer, but then I realised that environmental law in New Zealand actually involved a lot of planning law, looking at you'd be looking at developments, people applying for consents with local councils to build things. So it wasn't really. I think I realised that the subject matter wasn't that exciting, but I actually really liked the law of contract and property law. But those, because our law degrees are a little bit more generalised, and New Zealand then at the end of your law degree, then you can specialise, or you can start to specialise when you go into private practice.
I see. Okay, so was that the point that you realized you wanted to do contract law?
Yeah, so that wasn't really the point. That wasn't sort of the defining moment for me. The other thing I had studied at the same time as I studied, the reason, the other aspect of being an environmental lawyer is that I combined my law degree with a science degree, and that was at that time very uncommon. So I studied geology as well.
Wow.
And while I was it was my last year of law school. I hadn't quite finished my law degree. I still needed one more semester to finish my law degree, but it was like almost, I was getting near the end. Then I was offered an opportunity to study geology abroad and study in Hong Kong. And it was a PhD position, a paid PhD position, which is very rare.
Yeah.
And so at that time, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do.
You had to make a choice.
So I had to make a choice. So I went and I studied geology, and I completed my PhD in geology. And but at the end of it, it was actually very hard to get work as a geologist because there was a depression in the mining industry. So then I thought, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I will finish off my law degree.
Oh, okay.
And so I had basically another semester of law to do.
Yeah.
So I finished that off. And while I was doing that, I realised, I think I prefer this to geology. I used to joke with my friends that I like dressing nicely. I don't want to be like a dirty geologist that traipses around the mountain all the time. I want to be in a clean office environment.
Those are two very different job professions.
Yeah.
But it's really cool that you actually have a PhD in geology.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I feel like that makes you very unique. I've never met a lawyer who also has a PhD in geology. But moving a bit forward, now that you understood that you wanted to go into law,
yes.
What is the first thing you did after getting out of law school?
So I found I needed to find a job.
Yeah.
I was actually quite old at that stage. So as I said, I was 30, and in New Zealand, a lot of people start the law much earlier on because it's really, and in Australia, you tend to do a lot of your training is provided on the job rather than necessarily through law school.
Yeah.
But I managed to find a position with a mining company. They were very interested in my skill set. And I worked with the mining company and their external law firm. And so I worked there for a year. And then for personal reasons, I needed to move to Australia. And I started working in an Australian law firm that had a significant mining practice. And a lot of the work that I did was what they would refer to as front-end construction. So that would be drafting construction contracts, providing advice about construction laws, providing a lot of advice to governments about how they would procure large-scale projects, and also developers.
I see. So now we're to the point where you kind of have a job now. What are some things that, did you when you were younger, did you have kind of an idea of what being of a lawyer would be in your head?
Yeah, I guess I actually thought that being a lawyer would be a lot of litigation, so a little bit like what you see on TV where you see courtroom drama, but a lot of legal work. When actually I have only really been involved in one court case in my career as a lawyer, and unfortunately it went quite badly. I say I lost the unlosable case. Well, I was a very junior lawyer on that. So maybe I could abdicate responsibility to the more senior lawyers. I didn't appreciate the amount of work and the amount of time that I would spend in the office. And
what did that look like?
So, for example, when I was working in an Australian firm, sometimes just to keep on top of everything, I would start at 6 in the morning.
Wow.
But I would finish by 6 at night.
Okay.
But just to keep on top. So in those days, we actually dictated a lot of our written work. And in order to make sure that, and it wasn't necessarily that I would work consistently through that time, but I wanted to get myself ahead into the dictation queue. So I wanted the typist to do my work before others. And the only way I could do that would be to have my dictation materials prepared and ready and ahead of everyone at 6 a.m. in the morning. So, that was one of the reasons I used to start very early.
Yeah. That's kind of like a 12-hour workday?
Yeah, sometimes it was a 12-hour workday. But I was very junior and I had a lot to learn. And so it wasn't just about doing the work, it was also about like interacting with the other lawyers and getting guidance from them about how to do things. So it was very interesting, and that kept me motivated to turn up and to do those hours.
I think what I learned from talking to a lot of other lawyers is that being a lawyer isn't really what it looks like. Have you seen Suits?
I have.
It's nothing like that. I think that I've learned that when you're a junior lawyer, it's kind of like you have to start from the bottom and then it gets easier when you get to the top. Is that right?
Yes, definitely gets easier.
So when you were a little bit less junior, after to Australia, did you move to the Philippines?
So from Australia, I moved to work in a US firm in Singapore, and I went to a role in project finance, and which combined my skills. I guess I wasn't so strong on the finance side, but I was very strong on the construction and project document side.
Yeah.
And so then when I went to Singapore, then I had to learn how to do another product specialty.
Yeah.
So it was more about how project finance transactions fitted together, but I had my experience from drafting project documents and advising developers.
When you were at the US firm in Singapore, is New Zealand law the same as the law you practice there? Because I do know that, for example, British law and US law is very different. Correct me if I'm wrong, but was it different as well?
Yes, it's different, but when in a particular space, there's a lot of overlap between Australian, New Zealand and English law. So New Zealand and Australian law is based on the English legal system.
Yeah.
Although, ultimately the US system is also based on that system. It's just the Australian and New Zealand systems are much closer in time to sort of separating from the English legal system. And we also, our courts, when I was practicing in New Zealand, we still referred disputed matters that couldn't be resolved in the New Zealand courts to the what's called the Privy Council, and that's basically, it's essentially the House of Lords. So we had essentially the same highest court in New Zealand as applied in England. So we had a lot of commonality between our common law principles. So legislation might be different, but a lot of the common law was similar. And even in English law cases, they might refer to cases that were decided in New Zealand and Australian courts, if they were more relevant than the latest English cases. So in Singapore, I practiced in a firm that primarily they had US qualified lawyers, they had English qualified lawyers, and in the Singapore system, I was registered as a Singapore foreign lawyer. I couldn't practice Singapore law.
Okay.
And again, because I was primarily drafting contracts, it was these basic common principles that I was using rather than, legislation.
I see. Okay, that's good to know, because I think for me personally, I feel like sometimes when we talk about British and American law, it's kind of a very harsh choice. Like, you either choose British law or you choose American law. But it's good to know that in places like the Singapore law firm, you could work at a U.S. law firm but still have a background of a law school in New Zealand.
Yes, and I think in Asia, largely, a lot of the contracts are governed by English law rather than US law. I think it's particularly in the international project finance space. The principles would follow English law rather than US law. I mean, for a number of reasons that I'm sure your American viewers might not like it. When the opinions for New York law documents are really long. I think that generally there's a level of complexity and that you might get with a New York law document that you wouldn't necessarily get with an English law document, and because there is precedent for the use of English law, it's more likely to be used again and again.
Well, it's great to know a little bit about your background, but could you tell me a little bit about what the best and worst thing about working in law is?
So the best thing about working in the law is you get to use analytical skills. You get to do, if you like problem solving, it's excellent for that. So I like problem solving. I like analysing things. I like looking at how risks can be mitigated through mechanisms and contracts. So those are all the good things. You also get to work. You're not working by yourself. You're working with a group of people. So if you like teamwork, it's also provides a great opportunity for teamwork. If I think you like helping other people, it's also great for that, because as a lawyer, you're an advisor, you're your client's friend, and you're trying to guide them in the right direction. The hard things are obviously the amount of time that you need to spend in the office working on your clients, your friends, your friends' problems. I think that there's just a lot of pressure to meet billable targets. And then there's also, lawyers can be quite pedantic, and sometimes, and I think in your early years it's quite, you have to get used to a high level of criticism of your work. And sometimes that's a bit challenging. And I don't think that the legal profession is what it was when I started, but you could get some very volatile characters. Lawyers don't have a union, and people who are quite sensitive, and they might make promises to clients that were not achievable. And so I think managing expectations, hours, and managing difficult people, probably the hard aspects of being a lawyer.
So kind of building on that negative side of the law, has there ever been a moment where you felt really overwhelmed? Or is there a specific legal case?
Yeah, so I was, I don't think that the subject matter of any of my transactions has been overwhelming or caused me any anxiety, but what as I remember there was one transaction where I was basically the lead associate for, it was a $1.1 billion financing.
Wow.
And there were a lot of moving pieces at the stage of financial close. So we have a lot of, there are a lot of things that need to be done leading up to signing of the documentation, because you want to make sure that your client can satisfy all of the conditions precedent before, you want to know that they can sign everything that and honour everything that's in the loan agreement.
Sounds like a lot of pressure.
So there's a lot of pressure, and then there's a lot of pieces of paper.
Wow.
I felt that there was one point in one transaction where I was having heart palpitations. Like, I was so anxious about getting everything done. And I realised that, over the course of that month, I hadn't actually taken a lunch break.
Oh,
my
really?
My lunches were, I was certainly eating, but I wasn't moving, like leaving the office. I didn't leave the office. I was, I would turn up every morning, and I was in my chair, on calls, on emails, and I hardly moved for like 10 hours a day. And I was really anxious about all of the moving parts falling into place in time for the disbursement of the loan facility.
I mean, as bad as that sounds, I do also think that sounds like a great experience as well, because that's a huge case. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you learned from that case that really stood out to you that you still carry to this day?
I think once you've gotten over the hurdle of doing something like that it gives you confidence to do other things. You think, oh, well, I can do this.
Yeah.
I've done this before.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Hopefully, I aspire to do something like that. I mean, even though it sounds really difficult sitting for a month straight, I think that's really impressive, especially as a woman. So can you tell me a little bit about what it's like being a woman in the field of law? Because when I was a kid, when I would think about law, I would think about men being lawyers. But, it's really inspiring to see more and more women getting to the field of law.
Yes. I think I was probably quite fortunate in that I never felt that law wasn't available as a career option, and that being a woman wouldn't, it wasn't going to prevent me from becoming a lawyer. I'm a little bit nationalistic here, but when I qualified, the Governor General of New Zealand was a woman, and the Prime Minister was a woman. So, I'm from a country where women we're the first country to have gotten the vote. So there were a lot of women in senior leadership roles in my country that, for me, signified that, that girls could do anything.
That must have been really inspiring.
Yeah. So I think, yes, I didn't have a perception that I couldn't become a lawyer because I was a woman. And I think the challenges around being a woman is for me, were around when I had a child. So I was pregnant while I was working on one major project financing, and then I was still breastfeeding on another. It was the breastfeeding part that was the really challenging aspect. Maintaining hours and, breastfeeding was pretty hard. And then, when my son was really young, when he was 2 years, 1 to 2 was a particularly hard time, because he still needed to, be with me quite often, and so being in the office all the time wasn't really conducive to my responsibilities as a mother. I often reflect that if I was to do that again, I actually would have taken more time off, because your kids are only young once. Yeah. And it, in some ways, it trying to prove myself that I could do everything. I mean, I don't know who I was proving that to.
Yeah.
And my son lost out, and my partner lost out, and I was not able to do everything.
Yeah.
So
that's really inspiring and impressive that you really pushed through your career even though having a child. What has that experience taught you? Like, I know that you said if you were to do it again, you would have taken more time off, but me personally, that shows a lot of resilience. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there are women who have many more kids than I have and had, and manage it. I think that perhaps, and maybe this is controversial, as women, we feel that we need to prove ourselves because we have been in, largely the law has been male dominated, particularly in the sector that I was in, which is project finance, has been male dominated. That I think I would, as I mentioned, I would do it differently now. We really, if you don't get that time again with your children, and I would make more time for my son. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm sort of repeating. I think I'm repeating an answer to your question.
No, it's fine. That's a great answer. I think one of my last questions would be, what's the biggest lesson you wish a woman my age pursuing law should know?
Okay, so probably two things. Firstly, you don't need to specialise really early on. There are lots of different types of law that you can study, and it's okay to change because with law, often having a knowledge of a different area of law, you can take those skills to the other area that you will practice in, and because you're constantly developing your skills, even if it's that you're looking at IP law, but then you shift into looking at construction law, all the skills that you're using, the analytical skills, the writing skills, you can easily shift to another area of law. So I think it's the first thing. And then